So for today's video, I prepared some hopefully interesting tips and tricks as to why do interviewers ask you for failure stories in your job interviews. And I have multiple videos on this channel about how do you go about answering these types of stories. But I believe this will be more targeted with some tips and tricks as to understand what are they looking for from these experiences. So the first thing that I want to touch upon here is that any company expects their candidates to prepare for their job interviews, and this is the type of question. The failure stories are some of the hardest questions you could ever get, behaviorally speaking, in an interview. So if you haven't prepared, then it will most likely show up during the interview, which you don't want to. So this is preparation is something that company expect candidates from job interviews. And to give an example, Amazon expects you to spend around 2 weeks to prepare for the on-site interview, exclusively for the behavioral part, for the leadership principle, and so on and so forth. So this would be reason number one. Number two is they want to see if you're genuine, because you see, it's not these things. Talking about failure is not that easy, and well, I'm seeing candidates who can simply lie about these things in job interviews. I would say these types of people are very, very rare, and it takes a level of mastery that not many people reach in terms of these things. So unless you're a master of drama with these things, I would very much encourage you to be sincere with your failure. And it's actually this actually is closely linked with the first point, that you have to prepare a proper one. This would be the second qualifier here, whether you're genuine about your failure. This is the second reason why company would ever ask you for such questions. The third reason why you would get asked about the failure story is because an interviewer wants to see your sense of ownership. Because more often than not, what happens here is when talking about the failure story, and when you don't really know how to go about this, you will have a tendency to sugarcoat it. Such as, for example, you would say, hey, it was not really my fault because the other guy was supposed to do this, but he didn't. However, since I was their boss, I had to assume responsibility for this. So just the simple rule here to apply is that the interview is all about yourself. It's about what you did, not what other people did, and especially in terms of failure. So keep this in mind, that you must take ownership of that specific failure. Number four, in some instances, it's not good to talk about certain failures that you have. For example, if you just got fired from your existing job and you're applying for a similar role, and you've got fired because you've really done something awful, maybe it's not the best way to self-advertise during a job interview. And I'm talking especially in a US context here, but not only. So think about it. How big was your failure? Did you actually really screw up things in your previous role? And if so, then maybe don't talk about that specific example. I'm sure you have plenty other failures you can touch upon. Number five, since this is one of the toughest questions that there is around, many people have a tendency to block about it. You know, I have no idea about this. Come on, don't you have easier questions? So, okay, so what if you block with such a question? Well, it means that you might not be the type of person who can deal with difficult situations. And would this be a core competency for the role that you're applying for? I don't know, but you know these things much better based on your job description usually, and based on how do you get a feel about the type of company that you're applying for. So so I guess the main takeaway here is, whatever you do not block. And the best way to avoid such behaviors is, one, to prepare, and the second one, to just, keep yourself motivated at all times and be confident in your ability to deliver, because confident candidates are by far more successful in in their application processes. Number 6 here, some people have a tendency to be very negative. I mean, okay, it's a negative story. You develop on your specific failure and what you learn from it, and then you eventually end on a positive note. What many people tend to do here is to talk about, I failed, and I really failed on this one, so I'm really sorry about it. When in fact, you're disqualifying here, because think about it, who would want to work with such a negative person? Because this is what's all about here. Would you want to have a coworker working a few meters away from you that's negative about everything all the time, like, I'm never get promoted here, I'm never gonna get a raise here, I'm never gonna get the work done here. These are not the type of people who are, best performers in the first place, but these are not the people who companies want to hire, because a workplace is something that you build over time, and it's quite easy to screw things up in terms of mentalities. So negativity is something that you want to be really, really careful of. How do you want to be careful about negativity in failure stories, especially in failure stories, where you want to keep the negativity in the action part of your star answer. Talk about the situation, talk about how you failed, and talk about what you learned. What you learned should be in a positive context, or it should be at least ending on a positive note. So this is, part of a more general trend of being a negative person in general. So be very careful about these things. And 7, and last but not least, definitely not least, I would even argue that this is one of the most important things, technically speaking, about answering about a failure situation. They want to see did you learn anything from this? Did you grow anything from this? Or if you're just the type of person, yeah, well, I delayed this project by 2 months, but eventually I delivered it later on with great quality. Okay, so what? Did you learn anything from this? How did you grow? What could you have done things differently? What could you do differently here? What did you do to prevent these things from happening in the future? And just one more note here. So failure stories, I usually recommend my people to focus, of course, make them a star answer, but to formulate the star answer, such as use 1 or 2 sentences for the situation, 2 or 3 sentences for the action, and 3 or 4 sentences, 3 or more sentences for the learnings. So the learnings are the bulk of the answer. So together with it being a genuine failure story, the learnings are what matter the most in a failure context. And you've probably heard, I mean, it's all too common for interviewers to say, okay, we want people that are curious, that are learners and like to simplify things and so on and so forth. But the matter of fact is that you have many people who omit unintentionally their learnings from these stories. So so the overall point here is to not forget to talk about how you learn, how you grew from it, and make it a highlight of your answer. Talk about 2 or 3 or even more learnings that you had from that experience. So these are some of the elements that you should be careful of while touching upon these failure stories, which do get asked quite a lot in today's interviews and are becoming a more popular trend by the day. So also, if you want to support this channel, please feel free to share your interview outcomes in the comment sections of the videos, and thank you very much for watching.